Good morning. Live from the campus of the United States Sports Academy in Daphne, Alabama. This is Sports Talk, a weekly presentation from the Sports Academy and the Sports Academy's Department of Communications. I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden. I serve as a moderator. Today's panel is Dr. Steve Butler, who is our Dean of Academic Affairs, and Dr. Fred Cromartie, our Director of Doctoral Studies. An awful lot's been happening for what should be a slow time of the year for sports, including the debate over who should be the MVP for the NBA playoffs. And now we've got another kind of scandal within Major League Baseball, where you've got one club that's been hacking the emails and hacking the computers of another club.
That's not a scandal, it's a crime.
Yeah, okay. And thank you for the editorial. And of course, we've got the women's USA soccer team, led by Ms. Wamball last night. They did a wonderful victory of 1-0 over Nigeria, and now they go into the knockout round. But this past weekend, outside the lines, ESPN's investigative arm, we might say, did a very, very interesting story about the comparisons of athletes versus non-athletes who are arrested for whatever crimes they may have been arrested, and how their communities respond. This is talking about communities responding with lawyers, public backlash, and it always seems that college athletes were accused but never really were convicted. And in this article, which was written by Paula Lavigne, she points out that their methodology was simply to take a look at those universities that really were the town, like Tallahassee, Gainesville, even Auburn. And the studies, and this was about a 3-year study, the studies showed some very interesting kinds of correlations. And I'm pulling all these papers out because in this piece, there is a chart that she came up with indicating which schools. There was Florida, Auburn, Florida State, Michigan State, Missouri, Notre Dame, Oklahoma State, Oregon State, Texas A&M, and Wisconsin. And the two schools that really got beat up with this are Florida and Florida State. And so we're going to take a look at that this morning. And unfortunately, I don't know if this bodes well for those people in Columbus, Ohio, most of these kinds of offenses took place when Urban Meyer was the coach. Of course, he is the infamous mentor of Hernandez, great tight end. And now I guess he's Sluggo in the slammer. But at any rate,
Urban Meyer did win 2 national championships.
Yeah, he won 2 national championships. Yeah, you're right. That justifies it. Florida had the most athletes named as suspects, 80 in more than 100 crimes in Florida. But the athletes never faced any charges, had charges dropped against them dropped, and were not prosecuted 50% of the time. And we've all become familiar with what happened with Jameis Winston at Tallahassee and how that case was botched from the beginning, with access to the defense attorneys, which really not defense attorneys, having access to information even before the prosecutors did. But Florida State had the second highest number of athletes named in criminal allegations, 66 in men's basketball and football. And in 70% of those incidents, the athletes never faced charges, had charges against them dropped, or were not persecuted at all, prosecuted at all. They were persecuted in the media. Now, all of this adds to the credibility not only of the institution, but of the NCAA and in the eyes of the rest of the world, the conference. Gentlemen, what's going on here?
Well, let's put it this way. It is not unlike the general community where crime is committed and people go through the system, okay? The simple fact of the matter is that when it is at a high-profile institution and these athletes have the means of friends of the program who are attorneys in that, they do step up because many of those individuals are former athletes themselves and they don't want to see any problems, become something that is outrageous, I guess. And they do whatever they possibly can to help these folks out. Remember, you failed to mention one thing. In Florida, they give youthful offender status to students who are 18 to 20 years of age, okay? If that is for student athletes, isn't that across the board for all of the students on campus who might get in trouble? We also have situations where you have kids on campus who are not student athletes who get in trouble, whose parents have the means to work with them and within the system to help their children out of their troubles and their legal problems and that. So
from your perspective, this is all justifiable.
I'm not saying it's justifiable. I'm saying the system is provided for these individuals. And if you're in a position to take advantage of the system, that's just the way it is.
The system for the athletic department is a little bit different than it is for the general student population, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think we tell our students all the time that be careful with what you do with statistics, because we can make statistics say anything we want them to say.
Right.
I think the real thing, just like GPA, it's not fair to compare the GPA at Duke with the GPA at North Carolina State of athletes. It's only fair to compare the GPA of athletes at Duke with non-athletes at Duke, and athletes at NC State with non-athletes at NC State. These numbers are pretty much a microcosm of society. There's nothing outrageous about these numbers. At Florida, 24% of the crimes reported were committed by athletes. That means 76% were committed by non-athletes.
Right.
Where are the numbers on the percentage of those 76% that actually went to trial or actually were arrested? I agree with Fred. We would probably find if the numbers of athletes who weren't prosecuted is far greater than the number of regular students that weren't prosecuted, then we have an issue. But I didn't see those numbers.
No, because that's what. Let's move on with this, because I think you hit upon a good point, and so did you, and that is, even the author of this study admits we have to do more. We have to get a broader base, and we have to take a look at the percentage of those who were prosecuted and those who were, shall we say, absolved. I just want to remind you, though, that Nebraska was left out of this. And I'm just curious because Nebraska was the first football program to produce a convicted criminal for the Heisman, Johnny Rodgers. He was convicted of armed robbery, and of course he's cleaned up his life. Then we come back, and Bob Devaney was the coach then. Then we come back, and Tom Osborne's a coach. Has this great running back, Lawrence Phillips, who has some serious head problems.
Christian Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not.
He beat the living daylights out of his girlfriend. Don't know what prompted it, but still, he threw her down a set of stairs, banged her head against the fire hydrant, and so forth. The point is, I don't care what precipitated it. What concerned me was Tom Osborne's response. Tom Osborne's response is, well, we can really help him, and we'll get him help and so forth. I arrived Diamondbacks just in time enough to play the national championship game. Today, Lawrence Phillips is on death row in prison somewhere for some other offense. He beat up someone else. He has some real serious problems between his ears. And he just recently killed his cellmate.
Yeah, but it's not fair to condemn. It's not fair to condemn the Nebraska program.
No.
Three knuckleheads in 50 years.
No. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, and it's the same problem I had when I discussed with Coach Bowden, how, we'll take the high road. We're going to help this young man. We're going to help this young man. There comes a point where either you got to get the correct kind of help, or you've got to cut ties.
Well, that's the coach mindset. Most coaches feel, and I'm sure Tom Osborne really thought he could help him.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't.
I think he's an honorable man, but I think he was deceived.
But it's the same thing. You mentioned Aaron Hernandez earlier. I think that Bill Belichick looked at everything and said, we've got the Patriot way here.
Right.
We'll keep him under wraps, and the history of sports is loaded with those kinds of situations where every coach thinks that even if three other coaches have not been able to do it, that I can do it, or our staff can do
Right.
it, or we have the people in place to do it. And so But, these numbers are, to me, are not outrageous. I think that it's unfair to the general student population if athletes do get special treatment. But I think the number of athletes who have been arrested, over a 3-year period at Florida, if you compare that to the general student population, I think the numbers are similar. And
But it goes back again to the problems that we're having in our general society, okay? The fact of the matter is that we only single out football and basketball. And as far as I know, all these schools on this list that she went through, there's a number.
She gave a methodology.
I understand the methodology of it, but the simple fact of the matter is that within the methods that she designed for her study, it was to yield those results that were indicative of these two particular sports having those athletes that are involved in criminal activity. We've got a lot of sport programs. You get the reporting basically as it relates to football and basketball in many cases. There are others that came on and said, hey, baseball, basketball, swimming, diving, and all this stuff, these kids get in trouble too, but it's not reported. Women's sports, some of these kids get in trouble too, but it's not reported. So we don't have equal reporting. You want things equal so that you can sit down and take a real look at whether or not student athletes, when it comes to criminal activity, are getting something that other students don't have. Let's lay it all on the table and get it accurate up front.
And that's I read through that 3 times, and she makes certain apologies for not having extensive enough, but not in terms of the sports. These are the figures by sport, and she just took the sports that had the most offenses, and it turns out that it's men's basketball and football. You made a point of
and 100 football players as opposed to 6 tennis players.
right, and okay. You made a good point earlier, and it alluded to this. What kinds of interventions, other than having a house attorney and someone who is, hooked up with the police right away, which as a head coach, I enjoyed that too, although I did hate getting those phone calls at 3 o'clock Sunday morning. Coach, this is Alex. Could you talk to the sheriff? I didn't like those phone calls at all, I promise you. But you and I were talking about this offline. What kinds of programs can be put in place for intervention? For a kid like Michael Dyer, who he's still in trouble. He was at Auburn, it was a group, they just drove into the gas station. Somebody pulled a gun, I don't know what they stole, but what kinds of programs should they have in place?
Well, it's kind of difficult to say what kinds of programs they should have in place, because here's the thing: a lot of these problems did not just emerge in college.
No,
a lot of these
right.
athletes, they know that they have a track record of some of these legal types of problems as high schoolers, okay?
Right.
But yet they show promising ability as athletes, and they bring them to campus.
It's not a 4-2-4.
When you bring them to campus, and you know that they have these kinds of problems, then you should have it somewhat assessed by the appropriate kind of assessment to make a determination whether or not they have an anger problem or whether or not they anxiety or something along those lines that will make them do something that is out of the ordinary in terms of moving to the criminal side of it. But until you put all of the parameters in place that help to address these problems, you're going to wind up with the same thing.
I understand. And here's one mistake that a lot of coaches make. And I'm very, very pleased to say that at Auburn, I noticed very early that we had the Office of ADA. NCAA cannot step in if the ADA says, you have this, not what I'm calling it, accommodation. They can't, because that's federal.
Yeah.
I took every single one of our athletes across the board, male and female, who was a freshman, incoming freshman, or at a 2.4 below, had them tested for everything. You would not believe what we found. ADD, ADHD, somebody needed glasses. One kid needed a hearing aid. And I don't know how many of them needed other kinds of counseling for what you mentioned about anger issues. But the ADA, the Office of ADA, can administer and direct all that. And the NCAA can't come along. We have one guy, who I won't mention his name, but he was a tremendous athlete. And
It would be against the law to mention his name, by the way.
yeah, it would be, and the FERPA and all that, even though it's been 20 years. He could have, his accommodation was, he was to have a note taker go with every lecture with him to take notes for him. He was to have all of his tests extended time. All of his tests had to be given orally to him, and he had to respond orally. And if there were any writing, the writing had to go through whoever was assigned by the ATA office to make certain that that's what he meant. So I guess if there were multiple choice tests, I'd say, is the answer A, B, C, or D? What do you think? And so I think that's an amenity that a lot of them don't take advantage of. But getting back to this legal thing, at Florida State, if you take a look at who was the guy that they talked about, Nick Bonosort? Yeah, Bonosort has that position at Florida State because when he played at Florida State, he was busted for cocaine. So he's got some firsthand knowledge. This is not one of the situations where I think we're going to solve it. We have some good ideas here, and I don't want to overemphasize its importance, and I don't want to marginalize it either. But as Fred said, more studies need to be done so everything else can get on the table. Final comments.
It kind of along the lines of what we talked about last week. I think we need to put more focus on prevention and less focus on punishment.
I think that when you go back to coaches, one of the coaches today that believes that he can help student athletes out as much as possible as opposed to casting them aside when they get in trouble is Coach Saban. I believe in his philosophy. I believe that everybody deserves a second chance if you can give them a second chance, and you proceed on from there. Because if you lay it clearly out to the student athlete, there are those out there that succeed. Right. There are those out there that fail.
And Coach Saban is it's going to hurt me to say this as an Auburn guy, but Coach Saban is an Auburn man, and I honestly believe that he has the same rules for starting quarterback and third team guard, where some coaches have different rules for the 4-2 running back and the 4th-string tight end.
And the players real soon figure that out.
Yeah.
Real soon figure it out.
It's well known that there was one player that got in a bunch of trouble. Coach called him down to his office and said, "Here's the deal. Here's it laid out. I'm telling you, there's no wiggle room. There's no room for error. There's no margin for error whatsoever either. If you step out of line, then you're gone." And the kid said, "Coach, you're right. This is exactly what I needed. Structure.
Yeah.
I won't let you down." And he didn't. So
yeah, programs like that to come across as sincerity, and I just want to echo what they both said about Saban, because if Saban says it's time to go, you are really in bad shape. So we want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank our panel again. Gives us some expert advice, expert opinions on everything. And we want to thank you for continuing to tune in. We've received a lot of good, positive feedback on that. And we want to thank you for sending in the emails, making suggestions about what our topic should be. So please keep them coming in. That's emails. You can send it to sportstalk@usssa.edu. So for the panel and for the United States Sports Academy, this is Dr. Arthur Ogden signing off for Sports Talk. Have a great week in sports.